Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, and I'm feeling all Italian today, for some strange reason. Oh, I know why, it's Libeccio again. We last saw him handing out a spanking of fairly epic proportions in his Yamato. This time around he's sailing something that's actually Italian. Not that we have a huge amount of Italian ships available in World of Warships, yet, but this is one of them, a Tier 8 premium Italian battleship. Vittorio Veneto class Italian battleship, third of the class to be constructed, the Roma. This was actually a very good ship. Italy did build some very good ships in World War II. The Vittorio Veneto class battleships, a particularly good example. The problem, as far as the Italian Navy was concerned, was that they kind of lagged behind everybody else in radar technology, and the Battle of Cape Matapan, that would prove to have fairly disastrous consequences. Although not for the Roma, because of the other major problem that the Italian Navy suffered during World War II, with the British keeping a stranglehold on the Mediterranean, with control of the Suez Canal at one end and the Gibraltar Straits at the other end. Italy just didn't have any fuel. So the Roma's very short service career, she was commissioned in 1942 and sunk in 1943, she spent almost all of her time non-operational, tied up to the jetty, mostly in the Italian naval base at La Spezia, which is a very, very nice town, by the way. I've been there a couple of times. Getting bombed mostly by the US Air Force, B-17 bombers operating out of air bases in North Africa. The one and only time she ever sailed operationally, I mean, she'd been to sea before that, mostly travelling from La Spezia to Genoa for repairs as a result of Allied bomber attacks. But the one and only time she ever put to sea for operational reasons was also the last time she ever put to sea for operational reasons. She had been scheduled to go to sea in order to conduct an attack on Allied transport ships landing at Salerno as part of Operation Avalanche. However, the day before she put to sea to conduct this operation, Italy signed the armistice with the Allies. And so her orders were very rapidly changed, and in order to avoid the Italian fleet falling into the hands of the Germans, she was ordered to proceed to an Allied port instead. The first port that the Roma visited in order to attempt to fulfill this mission was La Maddalena in Sardinia. Unfortunately, by the time Roma arrived, it had already been occupied by Germany. Roma then received new orders to head to an Allied-controlled port in Algeria. However, Germany was equally determined that the Italian fleet not fall into Allied hands, and at this point the Roma's task force was being shadowed by a group of Dornier 217s with orders to sink as many Italian ships as possible. And these Dornier 217s were armed with Fritz X radio-controlled glide bombs. And so on the 9th of September 1943, the Roma achieved the distinction of being the first warship in history to be sunk by a guided missile. So what's this ship actually like in World of Warships, given that it didn't have a particularly distinguished combat history in real life? There are a number of good things about this ship, but some of the good things about this ship are also, well, kind of bad things. And that's mostly to do with the guns. We'll come on to that in a moment. As far as speed and manoeuvrability is concerned, this is actually, well, she's even faster than the Amagi, and the Amagi is no slouch when it comes to putting on a decent turn of speed. The armour isn't bad. Certainly you can bounce a lot of shots if you angle, but you don't want to be given broadside in this ship because she does have a citadel that sits above the waterline. Now, those guns. She's armed with 9 15-inch guns. She's got 6 up front and 2 turrets, 3 to the rear and 1 turret. And the shells from these guns have insanely high velocity, 910 meters per second, and that's kind of where the problem arises, as Libeccio scores nothing but over-penetrations against a broadside heavy cruiser. You see, these shells are just a little bit too fast. They tend to do nothing but over-penetrate. Oh, hang on a second. Torpedoes up ahead. Very suspicious looking smoke screen around the corner of the island over there. Probably an enemy for Buki. But he anticipated it. He unloads another salvo at the New Orleans, and once again, nothing but over-penetrations. This is the problem, and an intensely frustrating problem when you're driving a Roma, because any other battleship firing at a broadside cruiser like that would be administering a paddling of epic proportions. But the Roma struggles because the shells are just too fast. They hit, they pass right through the structure of the ship, and they're out the other side before they arm. So you've got the frustrating situation where this insanely high shell velocity actually makes it relatively easy, despite the rather suspect horizontal dispersion of the shells fired by these 15-inch guns, but the fact that they are so incredibly quick means that your shots do tend to be more accurate than not. Unfortunately, when you do hit, particularly if it's a cruiser you're shooting at, you tend to be rewarded with nothing but over-penetration after over-penetration. Oh, hello. Yeah, that Fubuki is definitely still lurking around over there. Assuming it is a Fubuki, the enemy team have two of them. But once again, Libeccio was aware that there was a destroyer lurking around the corner of the island up ahead, and he's in no rush to push forward into a crossfire, particularly since his team, and I have no idea why, are really taking their time catching up and pushing the advantage that they have here. These enemy ships are going to get away before the rest of his team is close enough to do anything about it, with the exception of a couple of his destroyers. But if any further example were needed to illustrate just how, well, bad these 15-inch shells are when it comes to punishing a broadside cruiser, just take a look at this New Orleans. How many times has Libeccio actually hit this guy with 15-inch guns on a broadside cruiser? And not one of them has been anything other than an over-penetration. Now, this doesn't mean that you cannot score a citadel on a broadside cruiser with the Roma's guns. Just don't expect it to happen very often. In fact, ironically, you'll often do more damage to a cruiser if they are not broadside. If you get the chance to shoot at the rear of a cruiser that's retreating from you, for example, your shells can often do a lot of damage. Assuming they hit, of course, because the Roma also has pretty bad horizontal dispersion, so shooting at a narrow profile target like a retreating cruiser, you're not even guaranteed to hit, but if you do, you can expect to do a fair amount of damage, as these high velocity shells travel the entire length of the ship before exploding somewhere dangerous near the middle. The plus side of these high velocity shells is that the Roma is actually pretty damn good, despite the fact that it's a tier 8 battleship and it doesn't have 16-inch guns. But she is pretty good at dealing with other battleships. Although Libeccio is still focusing on that New Orleans because, well, he's angled against the Gneisenau, the Warspite and the Bismarck, and it's the high explosive shells from the New Orleans that are actually the biggest threat. Well, that and the torpedoes from the Fubuki that's undoubtedly still lurking around the corner of the island up ahead. Getting kind of frustrated now with failing to do any kind of real damage to the New Orleans, he switches to the Bismarck once again. Now, the Bismarck is a very tough ship, so we probably shouldn't expect a citadel, and these are only 15-inch guns. But he scored 2 hits on the Bismarck, his first penetration of the match, because he's shooting at a battleship, not a broadside cruiser, and he's just increased his damage count by 16,000. So he's done almost as much damage to that Bismarck with one salvo as he's done the entire game to the New Orleans up until this point. The Roma is really quite a paradoxical battleship. Generally speaking, if you're in a battleship and you've got a broadside cruiser to shoot at, well, cruisers are the food of choice for battleship captains. That's not really the case with this ship. I mean, it's not impossible to score a citadel on a cruiser with the Roma's 15-inch guns. It's just very, very difficult. You tend to be a lot more successful firing at battleships, despite the fact that they have heavier armour. Like the Warspite over there. I know it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. That's just the way it is. Oh, it looks like the rest of his team have caught up. Well, finally. So glad you could all take part. The enemy only have 2.5 caps and a 4-kill advantage. So glad you could all turn up. Let's see if we can finish off the grand old lady, which is kind of ironic considering what the Royal Navy did to the Italian Navy during World War II. And there's his first actual kill. We're up to 57,000 damage. Not a huge amount. Now, where did that destroyer go? He's probably lurking up the channel. It's almost certainly, in fact it is a Fubuki. He has been spotted. There he is. Now, how badly does this guy want to die? Just exactly what kind of risks is the Fubuki prepared to take in order to launch some more torpedoes, none of which have yet hit, at Libeccio's Roma? We know the torpedoes are coming. I'll take some shots at the Auber while he waits. The Fubuki's attracting the attention of everybody else, and yep, the shots at the Auber missed. Here come the torpedoes, but of course Libeccio knew they were coming. He ain't stupid. Now, unfortunately, avoiding these torpedoes means that he is providing a rather big target to all those enemy battleships and cruisers up there, but he's killed the Fubuki. It's cost him a lot of health doing it, and now he's going to have to start angling against these guys. Observe what happens when he fires these 15-inch guns at an Auber that is angling. He actually scores a penetration. Now, I am not recommending, by any means, I am not recommending that if you are in a cruiser getting shot at by a Roma, then you give them a broadside, because they're just going to over-penetrate all the time. The chances are, yes, they probably are going to over-penetrate quite a lot, but not all the time. You're still a cruiser, and this is still a battleship. Yep, that was a paddling, and about damn time. Meanwhile, New Orleans, possibly emboldened after receiving nothing but battleship over-penetrations the entire game, is now giving broadside to a Normandy and a Scharnhorst. Ouch, yep, that probably hurt. Sadly, Libeccio was not able to take the kill, although I do feel he deserved it. And oh look, another destroyer coming down the central channel, determined to try to feed some torpedoes to a big fat stupid battleship. Unfortunately, he's got some Icarus problems. And, yeah. The Icarus, however, is about to run into trouble of his own. I mean, good job taking out the Fubuki, but the Fubuki wasn't the only thing coming down that central channel. There's a Chapayev coming down that channel as well, and he's got the Icarus in his sights. This is going to present the Icarus with a bit of a problem. I mean, you can try to smoke up, but it's a Chapayev, it has radar. And if the Icarus was to push forward, you get blasted by all of those enemy ships on the far side of the headland. In retrospect, the Icarus's best option would have been to just take the hits and get out of there, retreat, fall back to behind Libeccio here. Because that Chapayev is going to cause him serious problems. He's trying to smoke up, but the Chapayev has undoubtedly got him lit up with radar by now. Libeccio, obviously, not keen on exposing the broadside of the ship to either the Chapayev's 152mm guns or the Chapayev's torpedoes. They have a short range, but, well, they've got enough range to hit him here. Far, far better to finish off that New Mexico instead, because shooting at battleships is what these guns are for. Plus, it's going to reduce the number of ships shooting back at him. And there it goes. There's the poor man's Kraken Award. 4 kills. Now, the Chapayev and the Richelieu have come down the central channel, and the Richelieu's secondaries are no joke. But the Icarus did manage to get away a couple of torpedoes, although is one of them going to hit the Richelieu? He obviously fired them off in desperation. And he's not the only one, of course. There are plenty more torpedoes going down that very, very narrow channel. As Libeccio continues to back off, not anxious to be at full broadside from the Richelieu's 8 guns, and continues to focus on, well, the only ship that's actually in a position to shoot at him, which is the enemy Gneisenau. Scores a penetration, 2 over-penetrations, disappointing amount of damage, but the Richelieu definitely chowed down on at least 2, possibly 3 torpedoes there. How brave do you think the Richelieu's feeling? Is he going to come out the mouth of that channel? His secondaries are making life hell for that Farragut over there. And he doesn't need to. He's managed to sink the Farragut. Meanwhile, Libeccio's got himself a Confederate, and the Richelieu is coming out of the channel with a Roma. At point blank range. And he's showing broadside. And that's not a cruiser. That's a battleship. So these are not going to over-penetrate. Well, it wasn't quite the paddling we were expecting, but it'll do. And he is, of course, angled against the Richelieu. And all the Richelieu can realistically hope to do here is some superstructure damage, or knock out one of his gun turrets, but repairs are underway. The Richelieu is dead. That just leaves the Bismarck and the Gneisenau on the far side of the headland over there. And the Chapayev, who still has almost all of his health. That's 37,500 damage just waiting to be done. He is, of course, inside torpedo range. And of course, once again, we're firing these super high velocity guns at a cruiser. So unless the Chapayev is angling, we're probably going to get a lot of over-penetrations. But still, that's a lot of health waiting to be feasted on. And the Chapayev is not angling. Now, why do you suppose that is? Do you think there may be torpedoes on the way? I rather think there might be. Yep, lots and lots of over-penetrations, but the Chapayev is almost certainly aiming up for a torpedo attack. Which, of course, is exactly why Libeccio is in no rush whatsoever to commit any further to this turn. Yep, saw that one coming a mile away. The Chapayev now, realising that he's broadside onto a battleship, probably wondering why he isn't already dead, but knowing that his first torpedo attack failed, now puts the pedal to the metal, as Libeccio gets the high caliber award with 140,000 damage from even more over-penetrations. Libeccio gives chase. But what do you think this Chapayev's going to do? He's now one of only 2 ships left alive on his team. This is a battleship. The Chapayev has 152mm guns. It's not a heavy cruiser. Its biggest striking potential does lie in his torpedoes. And at this point, when you're outnumbered 5-2, and there's a battleship on low health in hot pursuit, you have to kind of assume that the Chapayev is going to be turning around in order to try to get a second torpedo salvo away from the other side. Now this is of course a hell of a risky move, because in order for a cruiser to torpedo a battleship in this kind of situation, he's going to have to expose broadside to him. Well, it would be a hell of a risky move if there was any battleship other than a Roma chasing after him, but the Chapayev doesn't necessarily realise just how much the Roma's shells tend to over-penetrate. They don't always over-penetrate. And there's the Kraken. And yet, there are the torpedoes we expected. And then within a few seconds, the team reaches 1,000 points. And that's game over. The enemy Gneisenau lives to run away again another day. And that's 150,000 damage, a Kraken, and a win for Libeccio in the Roma, the Italian Tier 8 premium battleship. Hope you all enjoyed it. And as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.